The lawyers had already won the room before Haruki sat down. There were 3 of them on Daichi's side of the long glass table, and they had arranged themselves the way predators arrange themselves, one at the center and one at each flank, so that wherever Haruki looked, he found a face that had been paid to dismantle him. His own lawyer sat beside him, a tired man from a storefront practice who had told him in the elevator that the terms were not negotiable, and that the best they could hope for was speed. Through the glass wall of the conference room, in the lobby of the company Haruki had helped build with his own hands, an Omega in a pale coat sat with one leg crossed over the other, scrolling his phone, waiting. Crushed peach and powdered sugar drifted faintly, even through the closed door. Itsuki. Daichi had not even bothered to leave him at home. Page 4, the center lawyer said. Section 9. Your client relinquishes any and all claim to Mori Foods, its assets, its goodwill, and its future valuation, in exchange for the agreed settlement. The agreed settlement was a number small enough to insult a stranger. Haruki had read it twice in the elevator and felt nothing, because feeling it would have cost more than he had left. Daichi sat at the head of the table in a suit that cost more than the company's early rent. He had grown into the wealth like some men grow into a uniform, until you could not picture him without it. Until the lean and hungry person who used to count crates in the dark of early morning beside Haruki had been overwritten entirely. He did not look at Haruki. He looked at his watch, then at the lobby, then at his watch again. I built the sourcing, Haruki said. His voice came out level. He had practiced level. Every supplier we have, I found. The financing in the first year was in my name. I did the books until we could afford someone who did the books. My client, said the center lawyer without looking up, acknowledges that you were a supportive presence during the company's early development. A supportive presence. 11 years rendered into 3 words by a man who had met him only that day. Daichi. Haruki said it quietly, and for 1 second the founder of Mori Foods looked at the Omega he had married at 22, and there was nothing in his face. Not guilt, not anger, not even the cruelty Haruki could have used as a handhold. Just a man checking whether a transaction was complete. Sign it, Haruki, Daichi said. You'll be fine. You're resourceful. You always land somewhere. So Haruki signed. He signed because his lawyer's hand was already moving the page toward him, because the Omega in the lobby had stood up and was stretching, unhurried, already done with the room, because there was a version of staying in that room that ended with him begging, and he had promised himself in the elevator that whatever else happened, he would not beg. The pen was heavy and expensive, and not his. He wrote his name and slid the contract back across the glass and stood before anyone could tell him he could go. Daichi was already talking to the center lawyer about a dinner reservation. Haruki walked out through the lobby past Itsuki, who looked up at him with an expression that was not triumph and not pity, but something more uncomfortable than either, something that looked almost like recognition. And then Haruki was at the elevator with his hand against the cold steel and everything in him running on the single instruction to keep moving. The doors opened. May was standing inside. She was the office administrator, had been since the 2nd year. A beta woman with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a memory like a ledger. She had clearly been waiting. She stepped out, took his elbow and steered him into the dead-end hallway by the freight elevator where the cameras did not reach, and she looked at him with the particular fury of someone who has been holding a thing too long. They never opened it, May said. Opened what? The safe. In the old back office, the one behind cold storage that nobody uses since we moved the offices upstairs. The one the founding papers went into when the 2 of you were so broke you slept on the floor of the warehouse. Her grip tightened. I did the filing, Haruki. I put them in there myself. The original financing agreement with your name on the note. And the operating agreement. The first one. Before the lawyers, before any of this. The one that says what you owned. The floor of the hallway seemed to tilt under him, and he put a hand to the wall. "That was voided," Haruki said, "when we incorporated properly. They drew up new papers. New papers that you never signed away the old equity in, because nobody ever found the old papers to cancel them, because they are sitting in a safe that Daichi forgot exists, because Daichi has not set foot behind cold storage in 6 years." May let go of his elbow. "He just made you sign away your claim to a company. But you cannot sign away what the lawyers do not know you have. And they do not know, Haruki. I watched their faces in there. They think you were a supportive presence." The company began in a refrigerated room that smelled of citrus and cold iron, and Haruki could date the start of everything to a night when he and Daichi counted crates of imported yuzu by the light of a phone because the warehouse lights were on a timer they could not afford to override. They had met at university in Yokohama, an Omega studying logistics and accounting, and an Alpha studying nothing very seriously, who had a talent for making people say yes and no patience for the part that came after. Daichi had the charm. Haruki had everything else. When Daichi announced at 23 that he was going to build an import business that brought specialty produce from small farms to the restaurants of the city, Haruki had pointed out every reason it would fail, and then he had quit his stable job at a freight company and helped him do it anyway, because that was what love had looked like to him then, choosing the harder thing because the other person was standing inside it. The first year nearly killed them both. Haruki put his savings into the financing and signed the note at the bank himself because Daichi's credit was a crime scene. He found the suppliers, learned which farmer on which island grew the sudachi that the high-end places would pay triple for, learned to read a customs form and a temperature log and a man who was about to default on a delivery. He did the books at the kitchen table late into the night. Daichi worked the front, took the chefs to dinner, shook the hands, and came home smelling of other people's restaurants. And in those days his scent had been clean, scorched ozone and good leather, a scent Haruki had loved. The operating agreement they drew up in that first year was a few pages long, printed at a convenience store. It said, in plain language, that Mori Foods was owned 1/3 by Haruki and 2/3 by Daichi, in recognition of the capital Haruki had put in and the work he was doing. They signed it on the warehouse floor. Daichi had kissed him and said the company would never have a single beam in it that Haruki had not helped raise. Then the company grew, and the kiss became the kind of thing that happened in front of investors, and somewhere in the growing, the 1/3 became a thing nobody mentioned. New incorporation papers were drawn by a real firm. Haruki, exhausted and trusting, signed where he was told. He assumed the old agreement had been folded into the new structure. He was an Omega who had built a company and somehow ended up with a title, head of sourcing, that made him sound like an employee of the thing he had founded. He told himself the title did not matter because the marriage was the real contract. He was wrong about that in the particular way reserved for things you needed to be true. Itsuki entered through the side of Haruki's life that he had stopped guarding, which was Daichi himself. He noticed the scent first, on Daichi's coat. Peach and sugar where there should have been only the curdled ozone, Daichi's own scent had become as the money piled up, and the man underneath it soured. He noticed the late nights that no longer smelled of restaurants. He noticed, with the cold clarity of a man who reads temperature logs for a living, that a pattern had changed, and that changed patterns mean spoilage. When he finally asked, Daichi did not deny it. Daichi said the word arrangement, and then the word incompatible. And then, when Haruki stood very still in their too large apartment, Daichi said the thing that Haruki would carry for the next year, like a stone in his shoe. "You were never going to be enough for what I'm becoming," Daichi said. "You can't even give me a heat. Itsuki understands what I need. You understand spreadsheets." The divorce was filed within the month. The lawyers came with it, and the lawyers had clearly been briefed to treat Haruki as a problem of public relations, rather than a person, an inconvenient former associate to be settled and shown the door before the company's valuation went public, and his presence in the founding story became expensive. Daichi had a narrative now, the self-made man, and there was no room in a self-made man's story for the Omega who had signed the original note. That was the man who had told him, on his way out of that room, that he always landed somewhere. Haruki went home to the rental he had moved into after the separation. A single room above a shop near the canal with a window that did not quite close. And he sat on the floor because he had not yet bought a chair, and he thought about a safe behind cold storage. The year since the separation had been a slow accounting of how much of himself had been kept in another person's name. He had moved out first because the apartment had Daichi's scent curdled into the walls and Haruki could not sleep in it. He had taken almost nothing. For weeks he had eaten standing at the counter of his single room because sitting down made the silence official. He had told no one the full shape of it, not his mother in her town up the coast, not the two friends from his old freight job who still texted him about nothing, as if nothing were a kindness, which it was. He had gone to work in the early months because the divorce had not yet finished, and he still, absurdly, had a desk, and he had watched Daichi walk Itsuki through the office like a new acquisition, and he had kept his scent flat and his eyes on the temperature logs and learned that a person could be erased slowly enough that the erasing looked like ordinary days. The mornings the coffee appeared on the corner of his desk were the mornings he made it to lunch without going to the stairwell to breathe. He had not let himself think too hard about who left the coffee. Thinking about it had felt like more wanting than he could afford. He did not sleep that night either. He thought about whether he wanted to do this. Not whether he could, the can was May's problem and May seemed to have already solved it in her head, but whether he wanted to walk back into the building that had decided he was a supportive presence and take from the disused dark the one piece of paper that said otherwise. He had spent a year teaching himself to stop wanting things from Daichi. Wanting this felt dangerously close to the old wanting. By morning, he had decided it was not about Daichi. It was about the lie. Daichi could have the company. Daichi could have Itsuki and the penthouse and the watch he kept checking. What Haruki could not let stand was the sentence supportive presence, the official record that he had been a guest in his own life. He wanted the paper because the paper was true and the story was not. And at 33, with a window that wouldn't close and a floor instead of a chair, the difference between true and not true had become the only thing he had left to own. The problem was access. He no longer had a badge. The back office behind cold storage was inside the secure wing, and the secure wing had been Daichi's first upgrade once the money came. Card readers and a logged door and a night guard who walked the floor on a schedule. Which was why, 3 days later, Haruki sat across a narrow counter from Renjiro Aoki, watching the operations manager of Mori Foods turn a ceramic spoon over in his fingers and decide whether to commit a crime. He had not chosen Renjiro lightly. In 11 years, Haruki had learned to read the building the way he read a customs form, and Renjiro Aoki was the one entry that never quite balanced in a satisfying way. He had joined some years back to run the logistics and the cold chain, an alpha who did not behave like the alphas Daichi collected. He did not flood meetings or restate other people's ideas in a louder voice to take the credit when the room turned toward him. He had been passed over twice for a director title that went instead to men who performed dominance better, and he had absorbed it without complaint, and kept the warehouse running with a quiet competence that Haruki had come over the years to rely on without ever quite saying so. When Haruki's marriage had begun to come apart in ways that the office could smell, most people had managed not to see him. Renjiro had started leaving a second coffee on the corner of Haruki's desk in the mornings. No note, no comment, just the fact of it. Until the mornings the coffee was not there had started to feel colder than the mornings it was. So when Haruki needed someone with badge access to the secure wing who hated the new Daichi at least as much as he did and would not run to him, there was only one name. The ramen counter near the port was nearly empty at this hour, steam fogging the window against the cold off the bay. Renjiro had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which Haruki appreciated, because the whole thing sounded insane out loud. The founding papers, the forgotten safe, A one-third stake in a company that had just spent a great deal of money pretending Haruki had never owned anything. "You understand what you're asking me," Renjiro said finally. Cold rain on iron, that was his scent, with something warm underneath that Haruki had never managed to name, surfacing now in the warm air between them. If we're caught in that wing after hours, with the safe open, it isn't a misunderstanding. He'll bury us. He has the lawyers to do it now. I know. You could go to a lawyer. Tell them the document exists. Have them subpoena it through the divorce. With what? I have no proof it exists. May's word, and May still works there. And the moment I name the safe in a filing, Daichi empties it, and I've handed him the only thing he forgot to take. Haruki turned his own spoon over, mirroring without meaning to. If I'm going to do this, I have to have it in my hand before anyone knows it was ever there. Renjiro was quiet. Outside, a delivery truck reversed somewhere along the wharf, beeping into the dark. "Why are you doing it?" he asked. "Not the company." "You don't want the company, I can hear that. So what is it?" It was a better question than his own lawyer had asked. Haruki found to his surprise that he wanted to answer it honestly. "Because for 11 years I let a man tell me what I was, and I believed him. And the last thing he told me was that I was a supportive presence." Haruki looked up. "I'd like one piece of paper in the world that disagrees." Something shifted in Renjiro's face, not dramatically, just a slight settling. The look of a man who had been waiting to hear a particular kind of true thing and had finally heard it. He set the spoon down. "All right," he said. "Then we get it for you." "We? You don't have a badge. You don't know the new guard rotation. You've never disarmed the wing reader, and if you try it wrong twice, it locks and logs an alert to Daichi's phone." Renjiro almost smiled. It was a small thing, mostly in the eyes. "You found the suppliers, Haruki. Let me run the logistics. It's the one thing I'm good at that nobody's ever wanted to promote me for." There was a beat where the warm air of the ramen shop seemed to hold them both. Two people who had each spent years being told they were the less important half of something, sitting on the same side of a thing for the first time. Haruki felt the wanting again, and it was not the old wanting, the begging kind. It was something steadier, and it frightened him more. "Why are you helping me?" Haruki asked. "Really? It costs you everything if it goes wrong." Renjiro considered the question the way he considered a temperature log, fully before he answered. 4 years, I've watched that man take credit for things other people built," he said. "I watched him do it to me. I watched him do it to you, and you were married to him, and you still let him." He picked up his cup. "I'm not helping you take the company. I'm helping you take back the part of the story that's yours. I happen to think that's worth getting fired for." He did not say the rest of it. Haruki could tell there was more, the way you can tell a crate is not full by how a man lifts it, but Renjiro drank his tea and did not say it, and Haruki did not push, and that restraint was its own kind of warmth. They began to plan. For the next 2 weeks they met at the ramen counter or in Haruki's bare room above the canal, and they built the retrieval like a shipment in stages with contingencies. Renjiro brought the guard rotation, photographed off the schedule taped inside the security office. He brought the badge reader sequence and made Haruki practice the disarm on a printout until his fingers knew it. May, from the inside, confirmed that the safe was a mechanical dial model from the company's first year, that nobody had touched it, and that she still remembered the combination because she was the one who had set it, a fact she delivered with grim satisfaction over the phone. What Haruki had not planned for was the rest of it. The way Renjiro listened, the way he asked about Haruki's day, before he asked about the plan and seemed to actually want the answer. One night the harbor wind came up hard while they walked from the ramen shop to the train, and without a word Renjiro shrugged out of his jacket and settled it over Haruki's shoulders. And Haruki went still under the weight of it, the cold rain and iron scent rising off the collar close to his face, And he did not give it back, and Renjiro did not ask for it. "You don't have to do that," Haruki said. "I know," Renjiro said. "That's the whole point of doing it." There was a thing Haruki had begun to notice about Renjiro, and he noticed it because noticing was the only skill no one had ever been able to take from him. Renjiro moved through the cold of the warehouse and the cold of the harbor nights the way other alphas moved through summer, unbothered, almost grateful for it. And once, when Haruki had asked offhandedly whether he ever cycled, whether the ruts ever made the work hard, Renjiro had gone quiet in a particular way and said that his hadn't been much of a problem in a long time. He had said it like a man naming a thing he has decided not to examine. Haruki, who had spent a year having his own body discussed like a defect across a conference table, did not push. But he filed it, the way he filed a temperature running a degree warm on a log that should have read clean. A small wrongness that meant something, even if he could not yet say what. He noticed other things too. That Renjiro's apartment, when Haruki finally saw it. The night they moved the planning there because the ramen shop closed early, was too good for what the company paid. A man it refused to promote. Not lavish, just better than it should have been. A clean place near the water with a view a logistics manager's salary did not buy. When Haruki's eyes moved over it, Renjiro caught the look and said the building had been cheaper when he signed the lease, and Haruki let it go, because he liked the man, and because everyone was allowed one thin excuse. He filed that too. Mostly what he noticed was that the planning had become the part of the day he waited for. They would spread the guard rotation on the low table and argue about timing, and somewhere in the arguing Renjiro would make some dry observation about Daichi that was so exactly right it startled a laugh out of Haruki, the first real laughter he had produced in a year, and the laughter would surprise them both into a silence that was not uncomfortable so much as full. One of those nights, leaving Renjiro's building, they reached the door at the same moment, and both put a hand to the same light switch in the dark of the entry, and their fingers landed together on the cold plastic. And Renjiro did not move his hand, and neither did Haruki, and the hallway light stayed off a few seconds longer than it needed to, while two people stood very close in the dark and did not pretend it was an accident. "We should turn the light on," Haruki said. "We should," Renjiro agreed, and did not. When the light finally came on, Haruki stepped back and cleared his throat. Haruki took the train home with the cold rain scent still in his coat and lay awake on his floor thinking that he had walked into this to retrieve one piece of paper and was somehow assembling, in the dark, the first thing in a year that felt like it might be his to keep. May confirmed the founding equity terms 3 days before they were set to go in. She had quietly pulled the company's current cap table on the pretext of an audit, and she called Haruki at the ramen counter while Renjiro sat across from him, and her voice was very careful. "It's worse than I thought," she said. "Or better. Depends where you're standing." A pause. "Haruki, the 1/3 was never bought out. There's no record anywhere of you transferring it. The new incorporation papers reissued shares, but reissuing shares on top of an existing undissolved agreement doesn't erase the original. It just means the original was never properly extinguished. If that first operating agreement is real and signed, then on paper you still hold 1/3 of Mori Foods. And the company is about to be sold." Haruki set the phone down very slowly. Across the table, Renjiro was watching him. "Sold," Haruki repeated. "Hideo Sato," Renjiro said. He knew the name. Everyone in the building knew the name now. The buyout. Daichi's been courting him for months. That's what all of this is. The divorce, the timing, the lawyers. He's cleaning up the founding story before due diligence, so there's nothing on the books that complicates the sale price. And an undisclosed third owner. Complicates the sale price, Renjiro said quietly, is one way to put it. Voids the whole deal is another. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Haruki had walked into this wanting one true sentence on one piece of paper. He was beginning to understand that the paper was not a sentence. It was a lever, and the company was sitting on the end of it, and a man with a great many lawyers had no idea the lever existed. "This changes what it is," Haruki said. "If I take it now?" "Yes." "It stops being about the story." He looked at his hands. "It becomes the thing he was afraid of all along, without even knowing he should be afraid of it." "You don't have to use it as a lever," Renjiro said. "Getting it out of that safe and into your hands, that's one decision. What you do with it after is a different decision, and you can make that one later. Tonight all we're deciding is whether you get to hold the truth. The rest can wait until your hands stop shaking." Haruki had not noticed his hands were shaking until Renjiro named it, and then Renjiro did a thing he had not done before. He reached across the narrow counter and put his hand over both of Haruki's, not gripping, just covering. The warmth of him steady through the cold that had settled into Haruki's fingers, and he held them until they stilled. "2 nights from now," Renjiro said. "Sato's people do their first walkthrough of the warehouse on Thursday, which means Wednesday the wing will be quiet because Daichi will have everyone upstairs prepping. We go Tuesday. 1 night of margin in case it goes wrong. And if it goes wrong? Then I run the logistics of that too," Renjiro said. "But it won't. You found the suppliers. I'll get you to the safe." They went on a cold night with the bay throwing fog over the wharf, and the plan for the first stretch worked exactly as Renjiro had built it. He badged them through the loading entrance during the gap in the guard's rotation, walked Haruki along the route he had memorized, past the silent stacks of pallets and the great closed doors of cold storage breathing their iron chill into the corridor. It was not the first time they had walked the route. The night before, Renjiro had taken him in on a dry run. No safe, no combination, just the path, so that Haruki's body would know the way without his mind having to spend on it. That run had nearly ended them before they began. Halfway down the records corridor, the night guard had come through a door he was not scheduled to come through, and Renjiro had taken Haruki by the front of the coat and pulled him sideways into the narrow gap between 2 tall shelving units of dead files, and they had stood pressed together in the dark, with the guard's flashlight sweeping the aisle a meter away. Haruki had felt Renjiro's heart against his shoulder, fast and then deliberately slowing, a man taking his own pulse in hand. He had smelled the cold rain and the warm thing under it, close enough now to almost name. Almost. The light had passed. The guard had moved on. Neither of them had moved for a moment after it was safe, and when they finally stepped apart, Renjiro had said, "Lo, now your feet know it," as if that had been the whole point, though his hand had stayed against Haruki's chest a moment longer than the danger required. Tonight there was no dry run left to hide behind. The back office behind cold storage was exactly as May had described it, a forgotten room of dead files and a calendar still turned to a month 6 years gone. And there in the corner under a tarp was the safe, squat and gray and patient, with a mechanical dial that had not been turned since May set it. Haruki knelt in front of it with May's combination in his head and his pulse in his ears. Renjiro stood at the door, listening to the building. The dial turned under his fingers. First number. Second. He could smell the cold of the room and, faintly, the cold rain and iron of the man at the door, steady as a held breath. The third number caught, and somewhere out in the dark of the warehouse, much too early, a door scanner chirped and a set of footsteps started across the concrete toward the secure wing. "That's not the rotation," Renjiro said very low. "Someone's coming in off schedule." Haruki's hand froze on the dial, 1 number from open, and the footsteps came closer. And he understood that the next 30 seconds would decide whether he walked out of this building with the truth in his hands, or whether he never walked out of it the same way again. The footsteps stopped at the secure wing reader, and the reader chirped its acceptance, and Haruki heard the heavy door release. Renjiro was already moving. He stepped over to the corner, killed the small work light they had been using, and pressed Haruki down behind the safe in the same motion. his body a wall between Haruki and the door, one hand flat against the cold gray steel and the other against the floor, holding them both still in the dark. Haruki's last turn of the dial was still uncompleted under his frozen fingers. He could hear the new arrival in the corridor, unhurried, the slap of a hand against a light switch in cold storage, the hum of a clipboard scanner. Not the guard. The guard did not carry an inventory scanner. It was a stock auditor, one of Sato's people, in a night early to get a head start on the coming walkthrough, exactly the kind of off-schedule diligence that ambitious money brings. He moved through cold storage logging pallet counts, his light flaring under the gap of the back office door and sliding away. Haruki did not breathe. Renjiro's hand stayed flat against the safe, and Haruki could feel the man's pulse where their arms touched, fast and then forced slow, the same trick from the records aisle, a man taking his own fear in hand so it would not become Haruki's. The auditor finished cold storage. The footsteps receded. The wing door released and shut. And then the building was only the building again, humming to itself, and Renjiro let out a breath against Haruki's hair and did not immediately move away. "Finish it," he said very quietly. Haruki turned the last number. The dial caught. The handle gave under his palm with a heavy click, and the door swung, and inside, in the cold dark of a safe no one had opened in 6 years, was a flat archival folder, and inside the folder were the pages printed at a convenience store and signed on a warehouse floor by 2 men who had loved each other once. He read it on his knees by the light of Renjiro's phone. Mori Foods, owned 1/3 by Haruki, 2/3 by Daichi in recognition of capital contributed and labor performed. His own signature, younger, more hopeful, the loops of it not yet taught to be small. Daiichi's beside it. And the financing note, his name on the bank's paper, the proof that when the company had nothing, the something it had was him. "It's real," Haruki said. His voice cracked on the word, real. May was right. It's real, and it was here the whole time, and he forgot. He forgot, Renjiro agreed, because he stopped thinking of you as someone who could cost him anything. They did not celebrate in the safe room. They put the folder inside Haruki's coat, against his chest, and Renjiro walked them back out the way they had come, through the gap in the rotation, out the loading entrance into the fog, and it was only when they were a few streets clear of the building, under a dead streetlight by the canal, that the adrenaline that had been holding Haruki upright let go of him all at once. His hands started to shake, and then his arms, and then his breath went ragged, the tension of a whole year letting go at once, and Renjiro turned him by the shoulders and held him by the wrists until it passed. They stood very close in the cold. Haruki could smell the harbor and the cold rain on iron, and finally, surfacing in the warmth between them, the warm thing under Renjiro's scent that he had been failing to name for weeks. Dried persimmon. Sweet and low, a note he kept buried under the colder one. "You did it," Renjiro said. "We did it. You found the supplier." A breath of a laugh. "I just ran the logistics." They were close enough now that the next thing was obvious to both of them, plain as an open safe. A thing that had been turning toward release for longer than either had admitted. Renjiro's hands were still around Haruki's wrists. Haruki felt the alpha lean in by a fraction, slow, leaving every centimeter of it as a question, and he understood that nothing about this was chemistry, that there was no scent compelling either of them, no heat, no bond pulling the strings, only 2 people who had each been told their whole lives that they were the less important half of something, deciding in the cold by the canal that they were not. Haruki kissed him first, before Renjiro could finish the motion, because he had spent 11 years letting someone else decide what he was, and he was not going to let even this good thing happen to him. He was going to choose it. The kiss was brief and certain, and tasted of the cold. When they broke apart, Renjiro pressed his forehead to Haruki's, and the warm note in his scent came up strong between them. And Haruki, who had been told a year ago that he could not give an alpha anything worth keeping, stood in the fog holding the proof that he had built a company, and the proof, warmer and more frightening, that he had built this too, out of nothing, by showing up. "I have to decide what to do with it," Haruki said against Renjiro's mouth. "The paper." "Not tonight," Renjiro said. "Tonight you just get to have it. Both of it." For a stretch of days, Haruki had the thing and did not use it, and those days were the closest he had come to happiness in years, which was exactly why he should have known they would not last. He moved a copy of the document to a safe deposit box and kept the original somewhere only he and Renjiro knew. He went about the ordinary business of his diminished life, the job applications, the single room, and in the evenings Renjiro came to the canal, or Haruki went to the too nice apartment, and they did not talk only about Daichi. Renjiro cooked, badly, with great seriousness. He told Haruki about the small farm his family had lost when he was a boy, the reason he had spent his life making sure other people's perishable things arrived intact, and Haruki understood the dried persimmon note in his scent a little better after that. A sweetness that had survived a loss. Haruki told him about the warehouse floor and the convenience store printer and the man Daichi used to be, and found that saying it out loud to someone who did not flinch made it lighter to carry. One of those nights, the warm thing came up in Renjiro that he had said was no longer a problem. Haruki woke in the dark of the apartment to the sound of Renjiro in the next room, breathing wrong, and he found him sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinets and his jaw set, sweating in the cold, his scent gone thick and unsteady in a way Haruki had only ever read about from the wrong side of a conference table. A rut, early and graceless, the first in years, his dormant body waking because something in his life had finally changed enough to wake it. "You should go," Renjiro managed. "I can't. I'm not. You shouldn't see this. There's nothing you can do. You can't help with this. Biologically you can't, I know that. Just go." It was the sentence Haruki had been handed across a table by his husband and his husband's lawyers, the sentence that had been used to file him under obsolete. "You can't give me what I need." He had carried it for a year as a verdict, and now here it was again, offered up by a man he was beginning to love, not as cruelty but as the saddest kind of apology. A man trying to spare him by agreeing in advance that he was not enough. Haruki did not leave. He could not slick the rut. He had no scent strong enough to soothe an alpha in that state. No biological key for that lock, and that part was simply true. But he had spent 11 years learning that the truest things were not always the biological ones. He got water. He got a cold cloth and put it at the back of Renjiro's neck. He sat on the kitchen floor beside him with his back against the same cabinets and did not flinch from the fever coming off him, and he talked, low and steady, about nothing. About a difficult supplier on a difficult island, about the temperature logs, about the loops of his own signature on a paper in a safe. He took Renjiro's shaking hand and held it through the worst of the hours, present and unafraid, until the fever in the man's body broke toward morning and the unsteady scent settled. And Renjiro slept with his head on Haruki's shoulder on a kitchen floor, eased not by biology, but by the plain fact of someone choosing to stay. When Renjiro woke, he looked at Haruki for a long moment, hollowed out and clear-eyed. "You stayed," he said. "You showed up for me with a second coffee for a year," Haruki said. "I can sit on a floor." "That is not. You could not. The books all say a beta or an omega cannot ease an alpha through this." "I didn't ease your rut, Renjiro. Your body did that on its own schedule." Haruki pressed the cold cloth into his hands. "I just didn't leave you alone for it. Those aren't the same thing, and I think you've spent your whole life letting people tell you they are." Something came apart and resettled in Renjiro's face, the look of a man revising a sentence he had believed about himself since adolescence. He did not say anything. He turned his hand over under Haruki's and laced their fingers together on the cold floor, and the persimmon note came up warm between them. And that was the answer. It was the best morning of the worst year of Haruki's life. It was also the last good morning before it all came apart, because 3 streets away in a Harbor View penthouse, an auditor's logged anomaly from the night of the retrieval had finally reached the right desk. Daichi did not discover the document. He discovered that the safe had been opened, which was worse, because it left the danger formless. Sato's auditor had flagged the off-schedule badge entry on the night of the retrieval, Renjiro's badge. In a wing, Renjiro had no operational reason to enter after hours. By itself, it was nothing, a manager checking the cold chain. But Daichi, with a buyout days from closing and the wariness of a man who has something to hide, went looking and found the disused back office, and found the safe, and found it open and empty, and felt, for the first time in years, the fear of not knowing what someone had on him. He sent Itsuki first, which told Haruki later everything about who Daichi had become. He sent the escort, the purchased one, to charm Renjiro at a bar near the port and find out what the operations manager had been doing in the secure wing, and what, if anything, he had taken. He sent a person he kept as a possession to gather intelligence on a man, because to Daichi by now people were simply assets deployed toward outcomes. It did not work, but not for the reason Daichi expected. Itsuki went. He sat beside Renjiro and was charming, because charm was the work. But Itsuki had spent his time in the arrangement watching Daichi from the inside of the arrangement, had watched him discard the Omega who built his company like spent packaging, and had begun to understand that the only difference between Haruki and himself was the date stamped on the receipt. Sitting next to Renjiro, hearing how the man spoke about Haruki when he thought he was being interrogated rather than courted, Itsuki recognized something he had stopped believing was real. He did not report back what he learned. He reported back nothing useful at all, but Daichi did not need the espionage to confirm it. The empty safe was enough. He brought in the lawyers again, and this time he did not aim them at Haruki because Haruki was harder to frighten now, and Daichi sensed it. He aimed them at Renjiro. It was clean and vicious, and exactly the kind of thing the old Daichi could never have done, and the new one did without losing sleep. An internal audit, suddenly, of the cold chain procurement Renjiro managed. Discrepancies, manufactured in the gap between what a warehouse actually does and what a ledger can be made to imply. A quantity of high-value imported product, reconciled to look as though it had walked out the loading door under Renjiro's badge. By the end of the week, Renjiro was suspended, then terminated, escorted from the building he had kept running for years, and Daichi's lawyers had drafted the threat of criminal charges for theft, charges that would be filed, the message made clear, unless certain matters resolved themselves quietly. Then Daichi called Haruki, the first time he had used his voice on him directly in months, and he was almost gentle, which was the worst part. "I know you have something," Daichi said. "I don't know what exactly, and I find I don't want to spend the lawyers to find out. So here's where we are. Your friend Aoki is looking at theft charges. They'll ruin him, you understand. No one in the trade hires a logistics man with a theft conviction. That is a career that does not come back." A pause, the sound of a man checking his watch even now. "Whatever you took out of that safe, you give it back, or you destroy it, your choice. And the audit finds the discrepancy was a clerical error and Aoki gets a quiet reference and goes on with his life. Or you don't and he doesn't. I'm offering you a clean trade, Haruki. You were always good at trades." And there it was, the cell built exactly to Haruki's measurements. For 11 years he had been told his choices did not count, and now the one choice that finally did count was a choice to surrender the proof that he had ever counted at all, in order to save the one person who had made him believe it again. Daichi had not even had to find the document. He had only had to find the thing Haruki loved and put it on the scale. Haruki and Renjiro fractured over it, the way two people who are both right and both afraid fracture. "Give it to him," Renjiro said. They were in the too nice apartment, and Renjiro had the flat calm of a man who has already decided to lose something. "It's a job, Haruki. I'll find another. Maybe not here, but somewhere." It is not worth your one true thing. It is not a job. It is your name. He is going to put a theft conviction on your name, and you know it. And you'll put yourself back under his thumb to stop it, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I'm the reason he won." Renjiro's voice stayed level, which was how Haruki knew how much it cost. "I watched you sign yourself away in that conference room once. I am not going to be the lever he uses to make you do it again. Give him the paper. I'm telling you to. You don't get to decide that for me." Haruki heard his own voice climb and could not stop it. "Do you understand that's exactly what he did? Daichi decided what I was worth and made the choice for me and called it a settlement. You don't get to do the noble version of the same thing. You don't get to throw yourself away to protect me and call it love. I have had that. That is not what I want from you." The silence after was the worst of the year. They stood in the good apartment that Renjiro's salary should not have bought, two people who loved each other and had just located the exact shape of the thing that could break them, and neither of them knew how to put it down. Renjiro left for the canal side door and stopped with his hand on it. The same hand that had landed on a light switch beside Haruki's in the dark. "I'm not going to let him jail me to spare your feelings," he said, "and you're not going to ruin yourself to spare mine. So we're stuck, aren't we?" He did not turn around. "I'd rather be stuck with you than safe without you, but I don't know how to make those the same thing." He left. Haruki sat on the floor of his single room that night as he had the night of the divorce, except that this time the thing he had lost was something he had built, not something that had been done to him, and that was so much worse. For 3 days they did not speak. Haruki went through the days half present, the way he had in the months after the separation, except that now there was a thing he could do to end it, and the thing he could do was the surrender. And every hour he did not do, it was an hour Renjiro spent under the threat of charges. He drafted the message to Daichi a dozen times. "Fine. You win. The safe deposit box, the original, all of it, in exchange for Aoki's name back." His thumb hovered over it. He thought about the loops of his younger signature. He thought about a man on a kitchen floor saying "you stayed" like it was a thing that did not happen to people like him. On the 4th day, Itsuki called. Haruki almost did not answer. When he did, the escort's voice was low and fast, a man speaking in a window of time he did not have much of. "He's closing the Sato deal at the end of this week," Itsuki said. "Due diligence signs off the day before. I'm only telling you this because I sat next to your operations manager in a bar and listened to him talk about you, and I realized nobody has ever talked about me like that, and I don't think they're going to as long as I'm useful to a man like Daichi." A breath. "Whatever you took out of that safe, if it's what I think it is, it doesn't matter to Daichi as a thing you have. It matters to Sato. Sato is buying a company he thinks Daichi owns clean. If a third owner walks into due diligence with signed founding papers, there is no deal. Daichi can threaten your friend all he wants, but he can't make the paper not exist, and he can't make Sato not care. You've been thinking about this as something to give back. It's not. It's something to deliver, to the right person." Before that sign-off, Haruki stood very still in his single room. "Why are you helping me?" he said. "Because I'm the next Haruki," Itsuki said. "And there's no safe with my name in it. Use yours." And he hung up. It reframed everything at once. Haruki had been trapped inside Daiichi's terms, a trade between the document and Renjiro's freedom, two things on one scale. But the scale was Daiichi's. Daichi had set the terms because Daichi still believed he was the only one with leverage. He had aimed his lawyers at Renjiro because frightening Renjiro was how he meant to control Haruki, and controlling Haruki was how he meant to keep the document buried until the deal closed. But the document was not a bargaining chip in a divorce. It was a fact in a sale, and facts delivered to the right party did not need anyone's permission. He called Renjiro. The phone rang twice. "Don't tell me you gave it to him," Renjiro said, instead of hello, and the fear in it told Haruki everything about the days the man had spent on his own floor. "I didn't give it to anyone," Haruki said. "I've been an idiot. We both have. We've been standing inside his trade like it's the only room in the building. It isn't. The theft case against you is a paper case, Renjiro. It lives in a ledger Daichi controls. The second I assert my ownership, the company's own counsel has to open the real books to verify what I own. And when they do, your fabricated discrepancy falls apart because it was never real. The same move that proves my stake clears your name, and it kills his sale, which means he is too busy keeping his investors to keep chasing you. He was already moving, already pulling on his coat. I don't have to choose between the paper and you. I never did. I just had to stop letting him hold the scale. A silence on the line, and then Renjiro's voice, rough in a way Haruki had only heard once, on a kitchen floor at dawn. What do you need me to do? The one thing you're good at that nobody ever promoted you for, Haruki said. Get me into a room, the due diligence review before it signs off. They did it the way they had done everything, in stages, with contingencies. Two people who had each been the overlooked half of something working as one whole thing. Renjiro knew the building's calendar better than Daichi did, knew which conference room the diligence sessions ran in, and when Sato's principals broke for lunch without Daichi in the room. Mei, inside, confirmed the schedule and did one last quiet thing on her way toward a resignation she had already decided on. She made sure the company's own counsel had, in their files, a flagged note that the original incorporation had never formally extinguished a prior operating agreement, a loose thread that had always been there for anyone willing to pull it. Haruki did not ambush Daichi. That was the part Renjiro understood and approved of, the part that mattered. He did not march to the penthouse and deliver a speech. He was a one-third owner with signed founding papers and a financing note, and so he simply did what a one-third owner is entitled to do. He requested, through the company's own counsel, to be present at the due diligence review of a sale of the company he partly owned. He did it on paper. He did it correctly. He let the document speak in the language the document spoke. The due diligence room was full of Sato's people and Daichi's lawyers, and when Haruki walked in with the archival folder and set the convenience store pages and the banknote on the long glass table, the same kind of table he had been erased across a year before, Daichi went a color Haruki had never seen on him. This is a former associate, Daichi started, who has a settled claim and no standing here. This is the founding operating agreement of Mori Foods, Haruki said, to Sato's lead, not to Daichi, because the confrontation that mattered was not with Daichi at all. Signed by both founders, never dissolved. It establishes that I hold a one-third equity stake that was never bought out, transferred, or extinguished. The divorce settlement I signed relinquished my marital claims. It did not, and could not, relinquish a corporate ownership interest that the settling parties did not disclose because they did not know it survived. Your due diligence is reviewing a sale that the majority owner is not, by himself, entitled to complete. He kept his voice level. He had practiced level. I'm not here to stop you from buying this company. I'm here because you're entitled to know what you're actually buying, and from whom. He did not raise his voice once, and he did not need to. The lawyers reached for the pages, and Sato's lead read them, and the temperature of the room changed the way cold storage changes when the doors open, all at once, and Daichi stood at the head of a table and watched the founding story he had spent a year and a small fortune cleaning up reassemble itself in front of the one audience he could not buy off. The deal did not die that afternoon in a dramatic collapse. Money is more patient than that, but it died. Sato's people did not buy companies with undisclosed owners and concealed founding documents, and a seller who had clearly tried to bury both. The risk was not the equity. The risk was the character of a man who would hide it. And once they saw that character clearly, there was no price that made it worth it. Before long, Sato had withdrawn. Haruki's claim forced the company's own counsel to open the real books, and the moment a genuine audit ran, the theft discrepancy against Renjiro showed itself for what it was, a set of entries that matched no missing product because no product had ever gone missing. The charges were never filed. Daichi could have pressed them anyway, out of spite, but a man fighting to keep his investors and explain a concealed owner had no appetite left for a case that had already been shown to be fiction. The apology that finally landed did not come from Daichi. Daichi never apologized. Men like Daichi experience consequences as bad luck. It came from Renjiro on the canal side, the night it was finally over. "I keep thinking about the word he used," Renjiro said. "Supportive presence. I heard about it. May told me, the day of the divorce." He turned to face Haruki under the dead streetlight. "I need to say the thing he was never going to say. Because somebody should. And because I watched you almost give yourself away again to save me, and I never want you to forget this. You were not the support. You were not the help, or the assistant, or the presence. You built it. The suppliers, the financing, the books, the floor we both stood on. You. He told you that you were the smaller half so that he could keep the bigger one, and you believed him for 11 years, and I am asking you to stop believing him now." His voice went rough. "The wound he gave you was making you think the thing you gave didn't count. It counted. It was the whole company. And it's the reason I'm not in a cell tonight." Haruki had spent a year being unable to cry about the right things at the right times. He cried about that one on the canal side, with the harbor throwing fog over the wharf, and Renjiro held him with the persimmon warmth rising between them, and for the first time the warm scent and the cold did not stay two things. Their scents mixed and made a third thing, cold and warm at once, the smell of the warehouse on a wet morning when the doors first opened, something neither of them carried alone. "I want to finish this," Haruki said into his collar, "on the loading dock, where we used to count crates. I want to do the part we keep getting interrupted before." Renjiro laughed, wet and surprised. "There's a delivery truck coming at 6. "Then we have until 6. They went in the dark to the dock behind the warehouse, where 11 years before a younger Haruki had counted crates of yuzu by the light of a phone, and they stood at the edge of it with the bay below them. And this time, when Renjiro leaned in, there was no danger to break it. No guard, no rotation, no scale held by another man, and the kiss they finished was unhurried, and certain, and entirely chosen. Their scents mixed in the cold air, and the smell was new, not his and not Renjiro's, but the two of them together. A delivery truck did eventually come and beeped at them, and they did not especially care. The company survived smaller and cleaner. Haruki did not take it from Daichi the way Daichi had tried to take everything from him, because that had never been the point. Because he was not built to be the new version of the thing that had hurt him. Instead, as a 1/3 owner with a documented stake and a now public founding role, he forced a restructuring on his own terms. Daichi, his credibility gutted and his buyout gone, no longer had the standing to run the company as a kingdom, and a board that now knew the truth of the founding was not inclined to let him. He was bought out, in the end, at a fair number rather than a punishing one, and he took Itsuki's absence and his diminished fortune somewhere else, and Haruki found he did not need to know where. Renjiro was reinstated, then made operations director, the title he had been passed over for twice, by a company that now belonged in part to a man who knew exactly what he was worth. May stayed on the condition of a raise she named herself and got, and Itsuki, who had spent so long being a possession and one phone call being a person, received some weeks later a short message from a number he did not recognize, thanking him and a line about a job opening in the front office of a small import company that did not, as a rule, treat people like inventory. Whether he took it, Haruki left up to him, because the whole point of all of it had been that people got to choose. In the office that had once held a story about a self-made man and a supportive presence, in the wing they had reorganized, on the wall behind Haruki's desk, the convenience store pages now hung in a simple frame, the loops of a younger man's signature large and unafraid beside a financing note with his name on it. Visitors sometimes asked what it was. Haruki told them it was the founding agreement. He did not always explain the rest: the safe behind cold storage, the night with the fog, the man who ran the logistics. But he kept the frame where he would see it every morning, because for 11 years a man had told him what he was, and he had believed it. And now there was one piece of paper in the world that disagreed, and it had turned out to be the truest thing he owned, except for one. That one came home most evenings, smelling of cold rain on iron and dried persimmon, and stood beside him at the window over the canal, and never once, not in all the years that followed, made the mistake of telling Haruki he was the smaller half of anything. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.